First, I'd like to greet everybody. It's wonderful to see this large group, and to thank the people at the Y, Rachel, who just introduced the evening, and all of the staff here who's helped bring this into being. The publishers, there are two publishers who combined their forces to publish this book, Mandel Villar and Dryad Press, and they did a beautiful job with it, I must say. We have Rabbi Beth Lieberman right here, who knew the family, and first had the idea, now wait a minute, this book is in German and it's so interesting and exciting and irresistible. How about it be in English? Isn't that right?
It was Naomi, actually, who said she wanted to read her grandmother's memoir.
Okay, well, there's a motivation. And so that project got launched a couple of years ago. I forget exactly. It was at the time of your graduation from Yale that your grandmother and your dad and I had lunch together at Bryant Park, and we talked about the specifics and firmed up some of the details and just got to know each other. It was a wonderful occasion. Malcolm Margulies has been doing fabulous publicity work for the book, and I hope you'll all have a chance to read it and learn from it the way I did. Each of my translations is an incredible learning experience. This one is so poignant and thought-provoking. I can't talk it up enough, even though I have a bias having worked on it. Every book in translation takes two villages to bring it. You know, it takes a village in Germany, where Hoffmann and Kempe, a very important publisher over there, originally published it in German, and the two publishers on this side of the Atlantic who brought it into English, and we're very grateful to them so that we can all read Eva's story, which is a unique one because she was so young, not even 2 years old when she entered Auschwitz, and she survived. Her mother survived, and even more incredibly, possibly her younger sister survived as well.
He's born there.
Was actually born there.
Liberation.
Was actually born there. So it's a very special and sadly almost unique story. We'll be hearing mainly about her book, but I would like to say a few words about Daniel Mendelsohn's work. A few years ago, I read an amazing article in the New Yorker about how he was teaching classics, and his dad decided to audit the class. I'm not sure how happy you were about that decision. I think you wanted him to be pretty much a fly on the wall, right?
Silent.
But as I understood it, from day one, he was very active, and the students really bonded with him.
Yeah.
I'm
glad we have a child psychologist on the premises.
And then the two of them, that is Daniel and his dad, decided to take a cruise to the various sites that are the sites of the Odyssey. And it's a beautiful book called An Odyssey. And the follow-up to that is, I understand that Daniel has now translated the Odyssey, Homer's, into English, and it'll be coming out next year with the University of Chicago Press. The book that we have here tonight is thematically tied to Eva's book, and I'm hoping we'll see some of the lines of similarity between the stories. It's called The Lost, A Search for Six of 6 Million. Again, a search for family members trying to reconstruct the family that has been fragmented and lost in large part. It's again, beautifully written. My hat's off to you, and I'm a very happy reader of your writing. Eva, thanks for having the courage and the insight to write this book. It means so much to, I'm sure, all readers of it. And Eva wrote this book in German. One thing that you might not know is that German is not even her native language. She was born in Slovakia. And so there's a lot of multilingualism going on tonight. Her English is much better than she thinks it is, but we'll be translating back and forth wherever that's needed for the different questions that come up. What I'd like to do now is call up Eva Umlauf's granddaughter, Nadia Umlauf, who is going to read an excerpt from the book. Nadia is a recent graduate of Yale University.
My mother and I were taken to Camp 2, Birkenau. We underwent the standard procedure, which has often been described. Endless waiting in the bitter cold, taking off our clothes, handing over all our possessions, inspection of all body cavities, shaving off all body hair, disinfection, outfitting with filthy, skanky prisoners. What word would fit here? Surely not suits, maybe rags. Registration, and, in the case of Auschwitz, that meant tattooing. I held you in my arms. In my mind, I hear my mother telling me, we stood in a long row in front of the man who tattooed the number on our arms. I held you tight with one arm. On my other arm, he tattooed a number, A26958. And then I asked and found myself holding my breath. She had recounted this episode to me innumerable times. This one little scene, which was so important because it was here that the stamp was pressed onto us. The mark was ingrained into our skins that we would never be able to shed. Then he took your little arm. You didn't know what was happening to you. The man, a fellow prisoner, held you tight and looked for a suitable place on your forearm. Then he pierced the skin. I have no memory of this scene, but I feel as though I'm experiencing the sensation of the needle stabbing into my skin. You cried out for a moment, then you stopped breathing. Your face turned blue, and all of a sudden you slumped down and lost consciousness. The pediatric diagnosis would be respiratory spasm, which happens to children under the age of 4 when they experience fright or sudden pain. It looks like an epileptic seizure, but causes no lasting harm. As a rule, all it takes is a thump on a child's shoulders and bring the child around. This is how it happened to me in my mother's arms in Auschwitz, all in a matter of moments. Once I could breathe regularly and the normal color had returned to my face, the number A26959 was burned onto my forearm. My friend Janko writes in his poem that my number is blue like my eyes. Were numbers and eyes bluer back then? Today, at any rate, the color of the tattoo is pale blue, but my iris is on the greenish side. The number can hardly be made out if you give it a quick look. The numerals have grown along with my forearm, and the color and shape look somewhat uneven. A glance in the mirror shows me that there are also darker spots at the edges of my irises. Survivors and their descendants have devoted a great deal of thought to their dehumanizing Auschwitz numbers and have made different decisions about whether to keep or remove them. Some had the numbers removed surgically, and once at the museum in Auschwitz, I met a survivor who gave the memorial site a numbered strip of skin that had been cut out and preserved. Nowadays, the number can be removed without leaving a scar. Ruth Kluger wrote a detailed account of why she finally decided to take this step after many decades had passed, and she felt she no longer owed it to her murdered brother to carry this number. Even as the skilled prisoner's hands were tattooing the number onto her, she was thinking, they're crazy. What will they come up with next? Wrote in Unterwegs Verloren. That is the difference between Ruth Kluger and me. My number has always been there. I remember my body only with this number, so it is a part of me, like any birthmark or wrinkle or scar. It connects me to those who went through what I did. In Auschwitz, children were always tattooed after their parents. After the war, the numerical sequencing enabled family members who had scattered in all directions to trace each other. The children were often too little to recall their names or where they came from, which is why the journalist Alwyn Meyer named his impressive book on this subject, Never Forget Your Name. Meyer kept track of the odysseys and many paths through life of the Auschwitz children. The numerical sequence is more significant to me than the number itself, and I'm glad it's still legible today. There is no more symbolic way of expressing that my mother and I belong together. My 9 follows her 8, and this numbering represents my mission to bear witness to our shared history. It is my highly personal memorial, or as Ruth Kluger put it, commemoration of the dead and affirmation of life all in one. As a psychotherapist, I also find the option of removing the Auschwitz number inconceivable. Though it would no longer be visible, and though I would be shielded from people's questions, deep down inside me, the brand would always remain. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadia. That was beautifully read. I just wanted to, before we launch our questions and have a very special poetry reading by Eva herself, I just wanted to read you a very brief snippet from my translator's note to give you possibly a way in to the ongoing need that Eva sees for this text and what it means to confront what happened rather than to bypass it. A key element in Eva Umlauf's psychotherapeutic, you heard from Nadia that's the profession that she chose to follow. Psychotherapeutic work is the concept of transgenerational trauma, the transmission of traumatic reverberations to one's children and children's children. Eva closed her 2011 speech at Auschwitz with these unforgettable words about the lasting impact of a horrific past that lives on in the descendants of both victims and perpetrators, and her hope that boldly confronting these horrors will usher in a day when they are indeed past. And this is how Eva Umlauf concluded her speech in 2011 at Auschwitz. I wish for all that has happened to be understood and processed from diverse perspectives so that personal suffering, societal ruptures, and brutal transgenerational traumas can stop being passed on to future generations and to society as a whole. For me personally, it is quite important in the aftermath of the Nazi period to acknowledge that those who were behind the electric fence, threatened with brutality and death, bear the burden of bitter feelings and the violence they experienced, and that those in front of the electric fence who have appeared untouched by these actions also have a tough time coping with the emotional legacy born of the burden of the offenses. Both sides, perpetrators as well as victims, pass along this legacy to their descendants and will continue to do so until these deeds are dealt with boldly and deliberately. And now Eva will be reading us a poem written by her friend that actually is what prompted the title of this book. It's yours.
The Witness, written by Jan Karszaj. Days were beheaded and pierced in front of the cherry trees. Sun rays were wrestled to the ground, to the transit camp to hell called Novaki, and you were so small, so young. Sun rays lost again at the railway station. They were lost to the special trains and guards men with a double cross on their uniforms, sun rays always lost to the train, heading to the land stolen from the Poles. You were almost 2 years old. The number on your forearm is blue like your eyes, like the mute sky over Novaki. Your belly was swollen like a balloon when they found you in faraway Oswiecim. No one could believe that you will live, that you'll come back to witness your broken home.
Thank you. This poem, as I gather, was written originally in both English and Slovakian, is that correct?
Yes, and German, of course.
And German
Yes.
as well.
Originally in English.
It's a very moving poem. And for those of you who want to read it again, it's at the beginning of the book. So you can have it in your possession. We have a series of questions that we would like to discuss for both of these speakers about their various experiences in life and in writing these books, these wonderful books that we have. So I'm going to say each of these questions in both English and German, and you two get to decide who goes first. Okay. Here's the first question. We've talked about these. These are not sort of out of the blue. What prompted each of you to embark on documenting your own and your family's experiences, and what did you hope to achieve in writing your books? That is in German. Was hat euch, das heißt Daniel und dich, dazu veranlasst, eure eigenen Erfahrungen und die eurer Familienangehörigen zu dokumentieren? Und wie habt ihr euch das Ziel der Dokumentation vorgestellt?
Ich wollte immer schon das Schicksal der kleinen Familie eingebettet in die Geschichte der Slowakei schreiben. Ich habe das nicht so früh geschafft, wie ich dachte.
I can't translate too much.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So
you just tell stop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stop talking. Okay. So you always had the desire to write about this small family in Slovakia. And I forget what else you said. I'm not a simultaneous interpreter. This is my maiden voyage at doing. I'm somebody who hovers over a computer all day and thinks hard.
You
about
want
every
to
word.
write it? No.
No. That would take all night. Okay. Und weiter?
Ja, und weiter. Es war dafür keine Zeit. Ich habe 3 Kinder, ich hatte eine pädiatrische Praxis.
Okay, so she had very little time because she had a pediatric practice and she had 3 children, a very busy life.
Very busy life. Der Tag hat nur 24 Stunden.
Day only has 24 hours.
Man kann auch nicht früher aufstehen. Das ist das.
You can't get
I
up
can
earlier?
get up earlier. I can. Und vor 10 Jahren habe ich Herzinfarkt bekommen.
10 years ago, she had a heart attack.
Und im Krankenhaus auf der Intensivstation habe ich nachgedacht, wenn ich hier gesund rauskomme, dann mache ich das.
Okay,
Das
so
ist meine Hypothek, die ich jetzt abzahlen muss.
when she was lying there in intensive care after her heart attack, she decided, if I come out of this, and I come out of this alive and healthy, then it's high time for me to write the story.
Ja. Und dann habe ich angefangen, professionell versuchen, wie man ein Buch schreibt.
Yeah, so then she decided to find out how you actually write a book.
Yeah.
First she said how you write a child, but I think she meant write a book.
Und dann war es natürlich so, dass ich zuerst einen Agenten brauche.
So
Dann
she
ein
realized she needed
Verlag,
an agent,
yes, dann ein Verlag,
then a publisher,
dann eine Historikerin, die mir hilft und mitreist und weiß, wie man in Archiven arbeitet.
then a historian who would help her do research in archives.
Und das hat gedauert etwas.
And it took quite a while.
Ja. Und nach einiger Zeit habe ich Glück gehabt.
After a while, she came to some. She
Ja,
she
ich
had good luck.
Ich habe good luck, ja. Ich habe gefunden sehr guten Agenten, sehr guten Verlag. Das ist alles hat gedauert, ja.
So
Und-
she found the agent, she found the publisher, and even though it took a long time, she got there.
Ja. Und ich fand auch Stefanie, die
She
mit-
found Stephanie, who's a journalist who helped her
ja, die,
pull this
die
together.
mir auch sehr geholfen hat, weil sie sich ausgekannt hat überall. Ja, und dann 2016,
Yeah, okay.
2016,
Got me
pardon.
for a second. We were in the
Yeah.
wrong century for a second there. Okay, so in 2016,
und kam das Buch raus.
yeah, the book was published in 2016
Yeah.
in Germany.
Ja, und das ist jetzt 8 Jahre.
That's
Und
8 years
das
ago.
ist jetzt die 3. Übersetzung, wo ich sehr glücklich und dankbar bin.
This is the third translation of this
Third.
book. What other languages?
Slovak, Czech, okay, this is a country, and English. No.
Lucky for us.
But I want to intervene because there is another element which seems to me more psychological, right? Because Eva in her book describes having tried to start this project in the 1990s, and I think at some point you say you weren't ready yet, you didn't have the proper distance, and that's a question that interests me very much. So yes, you have to, as we all know, you have to have an agent, you have to have a publisher, but what you really need is, in your case, a psychological space that lets you write the book. And that's, I think, the interesting question.
Ich hatte die Reife auch und auch Ruhe. Man kann das
So
nicht.
she came to a point of maturity and tranquility to be able to move forward with this. Do you want to tell us about your
Well,
response?
no, I'm interested both as a writer, but also as a person who wrote about the same subject. So my case is very, very different. My relationship to the Holocaust is much more oblique than Eva's. In my family, it was my grandfather's brother and his family who were murdered, Polish Jews who were murdered. And so our family was sort of haunted by this event. And so in my case, I had always been fascinated by this story, but in my family there was always silence around this subject, and the only person who knew anything about it was my grandfather, and he refused to speak about it. So there was a kind of aura of mystery around the event. And then so time passed, everyone died, my grandfather, that whole generation died. These were people born at the turn of the century. And then when I was 40, I don't know, I think I just became aware that the clock was running, that the clock was ticking, and that if there was still anybody left in the world who could bear witness to this event, I had to find them. So this was in the year 2000, right? So, but there's a sense of urgency that suddenly you think you have to get the story before it disappears, basically. So that's why I was interested in this thing that Eva wrote somewhere in the book about she wasn't ready yet to write the book in the 1990s, but then partly because of the heart attack, partly because the sense that one does not have infinite time to do this kind of thing. So I think it's a psychologically interesting question about why one suddenly feels that you have to deal with this story.
That's a very important point. And I would add that even though Eva was actually in a concentration camp and you were born after, because she was there at such a tender age, she has no direct memories, so the fact-finding process may have been parallel for both of
Yes.
you. Because it was almost as though she was between generations, not really there in the sense of being able to take away conscious memories.
Ich glaube, dass ich eine Brücke bin.
Yeah.
Ich bin mathematisch erste Generation.
Yeah.
So she says that she's like a bridge because mathematically speaking, she's the first generation.
Aber ich habe keine Erinnerung. Das heißt, ich gehöre auch natürlich in die zweite Generation. Und das ist der Unterschied von Holocaust-Büchern, die beschreiben,
Ja.
was zum Essen war und wie die Pritschen waren, wo sie gelegt haben. Das ist etwas, was ich nicht schreibe.
Yeah.
So she's in some ways part of the second generation because other books about the Holocaust maybe go into a lot more detail than she's able to provide on what sort of food was there and what the daily living conditions were. She was approaching it as somebody who was a bridge between the generations, between the first generation that actually experienced these things and the later generations that did not.
So it raises a very interesting question because, as you yourself say, you are a survivor, you are part of the generation to which this happened, and yet in another sense, you're the second generation because you have no memories. And I think, to my mind, it's an appropriate subject to talk about on Holocaust Remembrance Day. What does memory mean? We talk a lot about memory, but we are now at the moment historically when the people who have real memories of the Holocaust are almost completely disappearing at this point. So the survivors that we speak to now were child survivors and infant survivors in Eva's case. So then it raises the question of how do we remember this event when it's no longer part of living memory? Eva, an interesting part in Eva's book where she describes, I think I just wrote it down while you were talking, when you talk about Auschwitz and you say the selection process, the arrival process, and you say what has so often been described. So this is a story that we think we know because it has been represented so many times, and even you who were there have to consult the same historical documents that I have to consult, who was not, of course, there. So it raises an interesting question about witness, right? And you quote Elie Wiesel at some point, and you say, whoever listens to a witness becomes a witness. But I'm not so sure that's true. I think it's different, it's different to be a witness from somebody who then becomes a second-hand witness. It's two different things. People told me stories when I was interviewing people, but I can't claim to be a witness. They were the witnesses, and soon they will all be gone. So what is the responsibility of second-hand witness is what I would call it. Does that make any sense?
Soll ich übersetzen?
Ja, bitte.
Was ist dann die Verantwortung von der zweiten Generation, von den nach dem Krieg Geborenen?
Die Verantwortung, was sie haben, ist zuerst, dass sie nicht schuldig sind, weil sie nicht direkt gewirkt haben. Und die Verantwortung ist dass sie dafür verantwortlich sind, damit sich das nie mehr wiederholt. Weil sie das gehört haben und weil sie die Geschichte kennen.
So the responsibility is to make sure that this never happens again. But war das alles oder ja?
Ja, das war zuerst alles.
Yeah. So what I wanted to, that little quote that I read from Eva's speech at Auschwitz, where she talks about transgenerational trauma, Gefühlserbschaft.
Yeah.
Maybe this feeds in nicely to the subject you're talking about now. Daniel, did you feel some sense of that? The in your family, the very silence was fraught in your family. Was that your situation?
Yes, but I would be very careful to differentiate what happened in Eva's family, who were victims of this event, and what happened in my family, which was, again, sort of oblique, right? So I wouldn't say that there was trauma in our family. I think my grandfather experienced trauma because he was unable to save his brother, and that scarred him for life. My great uncle who was murdered was the only one who remained in Europe, and all the other siblings came to New York in the 1920s, and they were scarred for life because they felt guilty that they were not able to get him out of Poland. But it's very different to having real trauma in the family, which I think is true of Eva's family. Her mother was a woman who lived this experience as an adult, and that's real trauma. Ours is a sort of at an angle, one could say. So
Yes,
I would.
But what Eva discusses is the following generation. Her emphasis is the following generation, and even the following generations, plural. People who were not even born then, such as yourself.
Yeah. I mean, one certainly felt something, I don't know how to describe it, but luckily I have a psychologist sitting next to me, so she could. But I do think I think the word trauma is a word one has to use extremely carefully, especially in this day and age where people use it, I think, to describe, not getting the right kind of latte when they go to,
Was hat gesagt? Jetzt alle lachen, ich verstehe das nicht.
Verstehst du nicht?
Nein.
Okay, er sagt, das Wort Trauma ist vielleicht ein wenig übertrieben, weil das Wort so heutzutage lässig benutzt wird, wenn man zu Starbucks geht und das Latte schmeckt nicht besonders.
Ja,
das nennt man schon ein Trauma.
Ja, das ist wahr.
Yeah, right. It's the word. Interestingly, the German word doesn't include trauma, Gefühlserbschaft, and feeling inheritances, feeling legacies, or something like that. It dances around the word.
It's a better word.
Trauma,
I
yeah.
think.
But this is the parallel word in American psychological discourse, for better or worse. There's the trauma thrown in, and as you say, it's a word that's thrown about quite much. Okay. Another question for both of you that I think would engage both of you in the discussion. How did you both balance your respective meticulous research with the emotional journey of uncovering what happened to you and your families? And Eva, that is, wie erzielt ihr ein Gleichgewicht zwischen akribischer Forschung und seelischer Belastung bei der Entdeckung der Schicksale eurer Familien?
Bei dem Schreiben.
By writing.
Ja, by writing, ja.
Dealing with it by writing, yeah. So that helped you on a psychological level as well as getting it all down in print.
Weil man trifft sich wieder mit den Toten.
You meet up with the dead.
Und mit vielen Toten, von denen man weiß, dass sie da waren und nicht da sind. Und bei uns
She
waren
meets
das
up with many dead people who can no longer speak for themselves because they were once there and no longer are.
Und in unserer Familie waren das sehr viele. Meine Mutter war aus einer großen Familie, das 4. Kind, und alle sind umgebracht worden, nur sie nicht. Und sie blieb dann mit den 2 kleinen Kindern.
So her mother came from a very large family. She was the 4th child, and she was the only one to survive this. So a decimated family.
Und was ich mit den Gefühlserbschaften meine, ist, dass man erbt die Atmosphäre.
So
Does man-
what goes through transgenerations is the atmosphere that is somehow passed along.
Es hat uns niemand gesagt, meine Schwester und mir, wir sollen nicht fragen.
She and her sister were never asked to keep their mouth shut and refrain from asking.
Aber,
But they knew it.
aber wir haben das gefühlt, dass wir das nicht fragen sollen.
Ja.
Sie wird traurig, sie hat Tränen in den Augen. Das wollten wir alles nicht. Wir wollten nicht eine traurige Mutter haben, weil da waren wir alle. Das war ein unausgesprochenes Frageverbot.
So she knew that she and her sister knew that their mother was very sad, and that she was crying, but there was very little that they could do about it or knew what to say or how to act. Go ahead.
Als sensibles Kind spürst du, was du machen sollst oder nicht, ohne dass dir das jemand sagt.
Yeah, so as a sensitive child, she knew that certain questions should not be raised. She knew what to say and what not to say, more importantly, what not to say.
But this is very interesting because when I was interviewing survivors to do the research for my book, it was very often the case that, so the people I was interviewing, this was in 2000, these were people who were born in the 1920s. So they were young adults when
Like
the
my
war
mother.
happened, like your mother, right, born 1923?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And when I would interview them all over the world, the whole family would be surrounding them. And I thought it was to support grandma or grandpa while they were telling the story. And it was actually because they had never heard the story before, that generation, very unlike our own, were not sharers, right? And they thought it's in the past, you have to bury it, there's no point talking about it, especially when you had young children, you didn't want to bring it onto the children, so the past just was sealed up. And sometimes when I was interviewing people in the year 2000, it was the first time these family members had ever heard the stories. Mm-hmm. And that really shocked me, I remember. And that really conveyed to me how, and now I'm going to use the word, traumatic the experience was, in the sense of traumatic, in the sense that it stopped the conversation for these people. It was unspeakable to them. And one knows that this is a phenomenon that has been identified in Holocaust studies, that now a lot of very elderly people who have never said anything are starting to talk, because they feel that they have to say something now. And that's very interesting. And I was very struck by that when I was doing my research, that they had never said anything to their own families.
But why? Das möchte ich sagen.
Yeah.
Weil sie mussten sich schützen.
They had to protect themselves,
Yeah.
shield
Sie
themselves.
konnten das nicht in dieser Zeit. Die
Ja.
zweite
They couldn't
Generation
express
spricht leichter, schreibt Buch. Es ist,
Right.
es ist uns leichter. Also meine Mutter, die alle verloren hat, soll sie sprechen. Die Psychoanalyse war überhaupt kein Thema damals.
Yeah, so for this
Yeah.
first generation, this was not a thing to just come out with. The second generation has an easier time of it, but she just, I guess, had to swallow it for herself.
And as you just said, it was much less common. You know, now in New York, everyone has a psychotherapist. But it was not common.
I moved to New
you know,
Jersey.
Wenn das
people-
Wenn
no, but
das
it was.
hilft.
Yeah. No, but in
good.
those days, it was not common for people. You know, I don't think of all the survivors I talked to, no one of them had a psychiatrist. You know, they just thought you have to get on with your life, you have to keep living and bury the past, suppress the past, which, as we know, is not necessarily healthy, but it was the only way that they could do it. It's a very interesting question, I think, you know. And as Eva points out in her book, so my question for Eva, you know, I was so fascinated by the book. The book is a very remarkable book, and I just, as a translator, have to quickly say something because no one ever pays attention to translators. It's amazingly well translated. You never feel that you are reading a translation, which is the sign of a great translation. You never feel that. And I do think it's worth saying. It reads like it was written in English, which is not easy to do. But Eva is in a very special position. So there are, of course, child survivors, not infant survivors. That's very rare. So it's already an amazing story, very rare. Women often smothered their own children. It was a very common thing if they were in a camp because you had a better chance of survival. If you were with a child, you were basically finished.
I think the reason that her family did make it through was because they came very late.
They came very late. Exactly.
Process.
But it's also, Eva has, I think, a unique perspective, which comes out in the book, which you really should read, because she is a psychotherapist, right? So it's a very interesting position to be in, to sort of have been the victim of this historical circumstance and yet have a vocabulary to talk about it that most survivors don't, right? Have a kind of psychological insight. So the book is a sort of wrestling match with her own life, you know, not just Auschwitz, but the whole of her life and the way that Auschwitz ramifies throughout her life. And that's why I think it's so interesting. But I think it's a rare occurrence when someone can speak as both the subject of this historical event and a person with a psychoanalytical insight. So I don't get a percentage, but I do think you really should read it. You know?
Wolltest du?
Ja, nein, er hat recht, aber ich habe ja diese Ausbildung bekommen lange nach der braunen Diktatur, lange nach der roten Diktatur. Und
She trained in psychotherapy long after the brown dictatorship, the red dictatorship. She
And
lived
then back-
in various totalitarian
then back to
systems.
Germany, ins Land der Täter.
Yeah, and she
Yeah.
went back to the land of the perpetrators, Germany, in 1967, I think. You
Yes.
moved there. Yeah. So, I mean, my family, my father was a refugee from Germany and left Germany pretty early on, 1936. But where I grew up, a Jewish neighborhood in Queens, people didn't have big families. We didn't have, you know, other families had cousins and aunts and uncles, and our families were tiny. And also, grandmothers spoke only Yiddish. All grandmothers spoke Yiddish, as far as I knew, until the girl down the block had her grandmother visit, and the woman spoke English. I'd never encountered that before.
Agree.
So, we were somehow deracinated in our own way.
Ja, aber wir hatten auch keine Großmutter,
Yeah.
keine
she had no
Tante,
grandmother.
keine Cousinen.
No cousins.
Ich habe 2 Cousinen von Seite meines Vaters 2. Grades in Bratislava.
Yeah.
She has, what do you call
Second
them? Second cousins
Second-
once removed or something like that.
Ja,
I never know
und
how those
jeder
kinship-
sagt mir, was ist das für eine Familie? Das ist keine
What sort of
Familie.
family is that?
2. Grades, das ist keine Familie.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Und dann sage ich, wir sind so dankbar für dieses 2. Grades, diese 2.
We're so grateful to even have these second cousins because that's about it in terms of family. And just to speak about my husband's experience in Germany, he was born in 1947 in Munich to a Jewish family, to survivors. They had both lost their entire families. And there were children born in 1947, single children, never a brother or a sister, who were all born in that year. They were liberated in 45, married somebody in 46, had a single child, and in many cases kept packed suitcases at the front door, just in case. And the logic behind not having a second child was it would be easier to up and leave if need be, which is a very difficult burden to grow up with. My husband eventually left Germany and is in New Jersey with me, but not because of me. He was already in the U.S., but because of Germany. Yeah. So it's time for me to ask another question. Yeah, Eva, your post-war experiences living under communism in Czechoslovakia and then living in post-war Germany must have presented its own set of challenges. How did both these places shape your identity and sense of belonging as a Holocaust survivor? I'll read that in German. Deine Nachkriegserfahrungen unter dem Kommunismus in der Tschechoslowakei und dann im Nachkriegsdeutschland müssen besondere Herausforderungen mit sich gebracht haben. Wie haben diese beiden Orte deine Identität und dein Zugehörigkeitsgefühl als Holocaust-Überlebende geprägt? Kann man das zusammenfassen?
Ja,
Das ist ein großes Thema.
Das ist ein großes Thema für längere Zeit, aber ich kann nur sagen, dass im Kommunismus ein Jude zu sein, war nicht einfach.
It was not simple to be a Jewish person in the communist system.
Es waren 5 Familien, die zurückgekommen sind. Es waren in der Tschechoslowakei damals vor dem Krieg waren 80.000 Juden
There were 80,000 Jews in Czechoslovakia before the war,
und 60.000 sind vergast worden.
and 60,000 of them had been gassed in the war, during the war.
Und wenn man zurückkam,
When you came back, if you came back,
da
which
waren wir ein Wunder. Jeder ist stehen
it was a
geblieben.
miracle that anybody could return. Und hat man euch willkommen geheißen oder?
Also ich erinnere mich, dass man mich willkommen geheißen. Wer das war, weiß ich nicht mehr. Aber ich habe immer ein Stück Schokolade gekriegt, weil
They
ich
always
ein
gave her a piece
Wunder
of
war.
chocolate,
Ja.
and so she took that as a sign that she was welcome in
Ja.
Czechoslovakia.
Die waren diese, aber wir hatten auch, bis ich in die Schule kam, Kontakt nur mit diesen 5 Familien.
Before she went to school, she only had contact with these 5 families that had come back from similar situations.
Ja. Und man wusste, dass wir Juden sind, man wusste, dass wir alle Verwandtschaft verloren haben. Das wusste man, das war kein Thema bei jedem Abendessen. Überhaupt nicht, das wussten wir. Und das Leben
So they
war
knew that
schwer.
they were in this particular situation of being the only ones to return and living just among themselves. And at every dinner gathering, they were keenly aware of this.
Und meine Mutter, die hat nur für uns zwei gelebt. Sie musste sich kümmern, dass wir Dach über den Kopf haben. Sie musste sich kümmern, dass jeden Abend nach dem Krieg, was nicht einfach, was auf dem Tisch kam zum Essen.
So her mother was in a very tough situation to try to get dinner on the table for the kids every night. Remember, she had just come out of this incredibly traumatic situation, and she took baby Eva and even babyer Nora, and then this other child who had lost his family, Tommy, and she brought all of them back, and now she had to, even in the best situation, it's difficult to bring up 3 children, but the burden that she faced was almost impossible to imagine.
Naja, dieses dritte Kind war nicht ihr Kind.
Ja, ja.
Das war ein Kind, was niemanden hatte und wusste, wo es wohnt und wusste, wer er heißt.
This third child was not her own child. It was a child that didn't appear to have any identity. She didn't know where he belonged. Eventually, she was able to link him up, the mother that is, with some distant relatives.
Aber hat Verwandte gefunden.
Eventually, they found relatives.
Den Bruder,
A brother,
den Bruder auf seinem Vater.
a brother
Der
of his
Uncle.
father, so his
Der
uncle.
Uncle.
Den
His
Onkel,
uncle.
ja, den hat er gefunden und er hat ihn genommen und ich habe ihn sogar gefunden in Recherche von diesem Buch.
Right, and then I think he became a professor,
Professor.
Professor in Portland.
in Portland. Yeah. So don't know where you wind up,
It
right?
happens.
Ja.
And what about Nachkriegsdeutschland?
Das war schon mehr als Nachkriegsdeutschland. Ich kam 67, 68.
So she's saying that 1967 was no longer immediate post-war Germany.
Ja. 68 waren Studentenrevolten.
There were student revolts in 1968, the way there were
Plus
here.
ça change.
Ja, gegen Nazi-Eltern.
Against Nazi parents.
Ja. Und mein jüngster Sohn, der ist jetzt 38, fragt mich immer, was hast du gemacht, 68?
So her youngest son asked her, what were you doing in 1968?
Yes.
Interesting
Und
turning of the tables.
war sehr enttäuscht, weil ich habe gesagt, ich musste Deutsch lernen. Ich hatte deinen Bruder, der keine Nacht durchgeschlafen hat.
So she's saying that her son, her youngest son, who's 38, I think you said, was very disappointed that she wasn't out there picketing and protesting and whatever. She was studying German grammar and just getting through every day.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was not so easy.
Yeah, it's we have these images of the student protests of in
Yeah.
Germany. They call it the '68 generation. I think more often than
Now
we do here.
they are
Yeah.
getting in the pension.
Right
So
now
that's
they're
the work.
retired, right? If they're alive, right? Yeah, I mean, I went to college in '68, so but I think the reasons for protesting were somewhat different. It was mostly Vietnam oriented here. We didn't really talk about Nazi Germany, but maybe we should have.
Shelley, do you think there are audience questions?
Well, this might be a very good time to, in fact, our time is almost over. So let's find out if you have questions. Yes, sir.
Question for Eva. Given the long hesitation in writing about your story, how did you feel after the book was written in regard to your children and your grandchildren?
In regard to her children?
Vis-a-vis the relationship with these children and grandchildren after the story.
Okay,
was
du
told.
hast lange gezögert, bevor du dieses Buch geschrieben hast.
Ja.
Wie hast du dann danach gefühlt gegenüber deinen Kindern und Enkelkindern?
Meine Kinder haben mir geholfen.
Her children helped her.
Ich habe denen mal ein paar Research-Aufgaben auch gegeben. Und,
She gave them some assignments, research assignments.
ich habe gesagt, ich schreibe dieses Buch und ich brauche Hilfe. Und,
So she needed help, and there were 3, I guess, able-bodied men.
und nach der Premiere vor 8 Jahren im Literaturhaus in München kommt zu mir mein jüngster Sohn und sagt, ich bin stolz auf dich. So ungefähr. Ich
So
krieg
her
eine
youngest son came to her after she gave a presentation at the literature house in Munich and said, "I'm very proud of you,"
Yes.
which is something you always want to hear from your kids and
Yeah.
Ich habe
rarely
ihm
do.
das immer gesagt, wenn er in Latein eine 1 gekriegt hat. Und er hat das wieder benutzt. Für
Was war
mich.
das mit Eins in
Wenn
Latein?
er in Latein eine 1 gekriegt hat, habe ich gesagt, ich bin stolz auf dich.
So the tables turned. You know, if he got like an A in Latin, she would say, "I'm very proud of you," and now it was the other way around.
Ja, die
This
Zeit
is
dreht sich anders.
yeah. So the children grow up, and then they get to be proud of us. Sometimes,
Ja.
always with a sense of surprise.
Ja.
You can hear I'm paraphrasing, right? She didn't actually say that. That was me.
Other questions from the audience?
Sir.
It's a question for both of you. It starts with you, Daniel Mendelsohn, because you also wrote about relationship to teaching and now translating the Odyssey and writing a book about your family experience in relation to that. It's a question about exile and displacement from a land that once was home. I guess more in your case. And then going back to the land that was the perpetrator of the trauma. And I'm wondering, you know, how you said that receiving chocolate from others in Czechoslovakia made you feel that you were welcome. Was it possible to feel that you belonged? And what exactly is one's homeland when there's been such disruption?
Es geht die Heimat. Hast du das Gefühl gehabt, entweder in der Tschechoslowakei oder sogar in Deutschland, dass du zu Hause warst, dass das eine Art von Heimat war?
Das Wort Heimat ist für mich schwer, aber ich
It's
kann
a
das
difficult
erklären.
home is a difficult concept for her.
Aber als ich in der Slowakei, die Geschichte der Slowakei und der Besetzung ist anders. Wir waren ein Vasallenstaat. Slowakei war nicht besetzt von den Deutschen.
Slovakia was not occupied by the Germans,
Till 44, Oktober.
so very late in the game.
Yes. Und aber die Slowaken bräuchten niemanden. Die Deutschen haben wir 2 Gesandten gehabt, die Schreibtischarbeit nach Berlin haben die berichtet. Gesandte, 2 Gesandte.
So there were 2
Das
I
war-
don't know, like ambassadors or something
Ja.
who wrote reports back home.
Die haben einfach berichtet an Berlin.
They sent back reports
Und
to
die
Berlin.
linke Garde, das war was in der Slowakei war, die haben die ganze schmutzige Arbeit gemacht. Und später nach dem Nationalaufstand 1944, wo wir dann besetzt wurden, wurde die linke Garde zu der SS. Total hat sie den Platz dort bekommen.
Eric, I know nothing about this history. Can you tell us this? Or is this equally new to you?
Saying that the Linka Guard after the
It was
takeover in
Slovak,
October 44,
not German.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Slovak Linka Guard became the SS. So throughout the period,
Mm-hmm.
even before then, they were doing the dirty work of the German Nazis.
I don't remember if I actually introduced Eric Umlauf. This is Eva's oldest son.
repeat the question and the answer?
Well, I think this gentleman also had a very interesting question about the decision to reside in the land of the perpetrators is an interesting one, which I think people are interested in. So when I was reading the book, I thought that Eva's decision to keep her tattoo rather than having it removed was sort of parallel somehow to the decision to stay in Europe and actually even in Germany, that this is an indelible part of her identity, and there was no reason to cover it up. So I think just the question, this gentleman's question about why stay in Germany, why would one live in Germany after this experience?
I mean, I've been asked that when I go to Germany, like, you're Jewish, what are you doing here? And I say, well, I have just as much of a right to be here as anybody. The question just seems problematic. What does it mean to be a German? We're having some of this in the U.S. right now with the Christian nationalists and all this sort of thing. Like, who belongs and who doesn't belong, and that kind of polarization.
Aber die Frage war, warum bleiben in Deutschland?
Und
Warum leben?
Wo soll man hin?
Yeah. So Daniel's asking, well, why would you remain in Germany? And she said, well, where would you go?
Where would you
Yes.
go?
Aber ich wollte sagen, ich habe nie in meinem Leben gedacht, dass ich mal in Deutschland leben werde. Ich habe der Liebe wegen geheiratet und mein Mann, polnischer Überlebende, lebte in München. Und
So she never had the intention of living in Germany. She fell in love with somebody who was of Polish descent and a survivor, and he happened to be living in Germany, and she moved there only in order to be with her husband.
Und man hat darüber gesprochen, man geht nach Amerika oder nach Israel. Also diese Diskussionen waren, wenn man mit Juden am Tisch saß, sehr oft. Aber dann ist er nach 5 Jahren durch einen häuslichen Unfall gestorben.
Yes, her husband in Germany had an accident after several years of marriage.
5.
After 5 years of marriage, sorry, and didn't survive that. Did you want to say something?
I think it's getting. So first of all, thank you, Shelley.
Es ist noch nicht Schluss.
No,
Ja? Ist schon Schluss?
Yeah.
Nehme an.
Yeah. So sorry to barge in a little
Wer
bit,
hat
but
das
it's
gesagt?
yeah. I think we're going to have to
Yeah.
just close now. So thank you very much, Shelley and Daniel, and of course, I couldn't be more proud of my mom.
Ich wusste, dass das schon Schluss ist. Aber
And I couldn't be more grateful for everybody who came here today. I think I lost the little bet I had going with Natalie on who was going to be able to invite more people. So she clearly has a little bit more pull. But in any case, I'm truly grateful for being able to be here today and be here with all of you. So my mom's going to be available and Daniel's going to be available to sign their books. We've got a little bit of a reception across the hall, and I hope you join us for a little glass and to celebrate and talk some more. So thanks again, everyone, for coming.